From remote islands in the Pacific, a star of radio and film volunteered to combat the horror of war. In the frozen hills of Korea, his talents offered a brief respite from the devastation and death. From the jungles of Vietnam to the deserts of the Middle East, his leadership brought a little bit of home thousands of miles away. Today, a grateful nation honors his enduring legacy to help heal the emotional wounds of war through the gift of laughter. The inspiration to entertain troops began with vaudevillian Elsie Janis, who performed for Allied troops for 6 months during World War I. Soldiers of the American Expeditionary Force called her the sweetheart of the AEF. Bob Hope's career began on vaudeville as well. He became a pioneer during the days of radio before his punchlines and pratfalls appeared on the silver screens across the country.
I'd like a little more drape and a little less droop.
Well, why didn't you say so? We'll be only too happy to make it overboard.
Well, that'll help.
Yeah. What about the trousers?
Well, they're a little snug under the arms. And what's in this snood back here, you hootie?
However, the true leadership of Bob Hope would not come through these avenues, but rather through his philanthropy. His tireless dedication to the men and women of the U.S. military, spanning 50 years to support the morale of American troops in conflicts around the world.
I was on radio at NBC, and the producer said, they want you at March Field next year. I said, what's March Field? He said, that's an Air Force base in Riverside. The audience was so great. I said, wait a minute, how long has this been going on?
From that first show that he did at March Field in Riverside, California in 1941, he recognized that that audience needed him more and appreciated him more than any other audience he'd ever found.
In 1941, the Department of Defense worked with the newly created United Service Organization to provide innovative programs designed to improve troop morale, increase camaraderie, and remind soldiers of what they were fighting for: home, safety, and freedom. Bob Hope would lead by example, inspiring other entertainers to lend their talent, arguably expanding the definition of leadership.
Some people lead through threats and fear. Others lead by ordering people around. They have to be elected. This is a totally different story. Bob Hope led through love. He loved those soldiers. And so he brought laughter into a crisis.
Right after Pearl Harbor, he was one of the ones who was advocating Hollywood stars get out there and entertain. He went out and took tours of the country on war bond drives, and then as soon as he could, he went overseas and started entertaining.
I just arrived from the States. You know the States, that's where Churchill lives. I just want you boys to see what you're fighting for, that's all.
When he first went to North Africa in 1943, there was still a lot of German shelling. It was very dangerous, and the idea that he would travel overseas into sometimes dangerous areas to entertain them was an incredibly powerful experience for the troops.
Careful, careful. Huh? Snipers.
In my mind, he redefined what it means to lead and to be a leader. He showed up a lone man on a stage in a war zone with a microphone, and tens of thousands of soldiers, Marines, sailors, airmen, they all went with him with their hearts.
For all too many who paid the ultimate sacrifice for their nation, these were the last precious moments of levity and laughter. In 1946, General Eisenhower presented Hope with the Medal for Merit for his work with the United Service Organization during World War II. When the war in Korea began in 1950, America's sons and daughters were greeted with a familiar grin as Bob Hope volunteered his talents once again. Hundreds of USO performances were staged across South Korea, many of which were headlined by Hope. Following the war in Korea, he routinely appeared and performed for servicemen and women stationed across the United States and overseas. In 1963, President Kennedy awarded Hope the Congressional Gold Medal for service to his country.
I hope everyone had a chance to look at it and present it to you on behalf of the people of the United States. Thank you very much, Mr. President. That's very nice. I actually don't like to tell jokes about a thing like this because it's one of the nicest things that's ever happened to me, and I feel very humble, although I think I have the strength of character to fight it.
1964 marked the first USO Bob Hope Christmas tour in Vietnam. He would return every year during the holidays to perform at American bases across Southeast Asia.
Here I am at Da Nang, better known as Dodge City. But here we are at Pleiku, Vietnam. Very thrilled to be back here at Ubon, Tak Lee, the megalopolis of the boondocks. Here we are at Cam Ranh Bay. Now, it's wonderful to be here in this zillion-dollar cat box. I'm happy to be here in Karat, Long Binh, Chansanu, Chu Lai. Thank you very much. I'm very thrilled to be here. Where are we?
Somehow, he was able to transform pain, despair, isolation, depression, anxiety. He transformed that into laughter.
I stepped off the plane. I was mugged by a mosquito. I bring you Christmas greetings from your wife, and she wants me to kiss you for her. Well, a promise is a promise. Well, he's been taking his salt tablets, I want to tell you that.
Following the Tet Offensive in 1968, public support for the war in Vietnam declined. From the perspective of many anti-war activists, Hope was seen as an advocate of the Nixon administration in the war in Southeast Asia.
During Vietnam, Bob Hope thought that he was doing the same thing that he did in World War II, just entertaining the troops. But he didn't realize the way the ground had shifted in the country, and the dissent against the war was so strong. He sort of crossed the line from being a patriot to being a partisan, and that alienated a good part of the generation.
Most veterans had a different perspective. Master Sergeant Robert Gilman saw Bob Hope in Saipan in 1945 and again in Da Nang, Vietnam in 1964.
More than anything, Bob Hope was one of the guys. Bob Hope brought home to the troops, and for a while, the war disappeared.
In 1990, at the age of 87, Bob Hope once again brought his punchlines to the troops of the Gulf War.
This is really something out here. I got sand in places where I didn't even know I had places.
6 years later, Congress designated Bob Hope as the first honorary veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces.
When you began your tours during World War II, we were all young, eager, ready to take on the fight, little realizing how much we would miss things at home. Well, you brought those things to us through your shows. You were the link to our families and to back home. You reminded us that someone cared about the job we were doing and the reason why we were doing it.
You are now a veteran.
On July 27, 2003, 2 months after his 100th birthday, the microphone fell silent. Former President Bill Clinton stated that Hope had left a matchless legacy of laughs to people all over the world.
On the morning of his funeral, we had to have the service at 4 o'clock in the morning in order to avoid the press. But even at 4 o'clock in the morning, there were still people and limousines and cars and helicopters circling. But there was one man, a Marine, in uniform, standing at the gate, and he was saluting, and he stayed there all day. I was so moved by that. It was just a silent tribute. And I'll never know his name, but I will never forget him.
This statue along the Embarcadero honors legendary entertainer Bob Hope, who is still helping the military more than a decade after his death. The Hope Foundation just donated more than $1 million to veterans.
Today, the Bob and Dolores Hope Foundation has partnered with Easter Seals, raising money to help veterans transition back into civilian society and restoring that feeling of home that Bob Hope has brought to generations of veterans since 1941. From vaudevillian to veteran, whether patriot or partisan, Bob Hope's legacy is memorialized today in San Diego, California, where generations of Americans can reflect on 50 years of leadership in improving the morale of those who served our nation. Armed with a microphone, his golf club, and his indelible grin, his legacy resonates through today's USO program, supporting our troops serving around the globe.
In my mind, his greatest legacy is that he took his talents to the center of a crisis and used them to heal. And for that, I believe that he will be remembered and he will be an inspiration to everyone who saw him perform and to anyone that hears his story. He loved his freedom and he loved the men and women who defended it.
Thanks for the memory
of sentimental verse